He was a husband, a father, a man who lived in the suburbs, attended family barbecues, and seemed to love his children. But beneath that mask of normalcy lurked one of the most ruthless killers in American history. His name was Richard Kuklinski, but the world would come to know him as the Iceman. For decades, Kuklinski worked in the shadows of organized crime, carrying out contract killings with chilling efficiency. He was a man who murdered with guns, knives, poison, and even crossbows, and then went home in time for dinner. What made him truly terrifying wasn't just the number of lives he claimed, it was how effortlessly he blended two worlds: the ordinary life of a suburban dad and the dark life of a man who could kill without a second thought. This is the story of Richard Kuklinski, the abusive childhood that shaped him, the brutal crimes that earned him the name Iceman, and the undercover sting that finally brought his reign of terror to an end. Richard Leonard Kuklinski was born on April 11, 1935, in Jersey City, New Jersey. His home life was a nightmare. His father, Stanley, was a violent alcoholic who routinely beat his children. His mother, Anna, was deeply religious but also abusive, often disciplining Richard with broom handles and other objects. From an early age, Richard learned two things: the pain was constant, and that violence was survival. School offered no escape. Richard was bullied relentlessly for his shy, awkward nature, but instead of shrinking away, he began to fight back. And once he realized the fear he could instill in others, it became addictive. By his teens, Kuklinski's temper was uncontrollable. He was known to roam the streets of Jersey City looking for fights. Some stories claim that one of his earliest murders happened during this time. Richard allegedly killed a neighborhood bully who had humiliated him, beating him to death and then dumping his body off a bridge. Whether that story is a fact or self-mythologizing, one thing is certain. By the time Richard was 18, he had developed a frightening lack of empathy. Hurting people didn't trouble him, it gave him a sense of power. In the years that followed, Kuklinski drifted into crime almost naturally. At first, it was petty theft, burglary, and small hustle. He made bootleg pornographic films, distributed pirated tapes, and dabbled in stolen goods. He was a hustler, but one with a dangerous streak. Word quickly spread that Richard Kuklinski was someone you did not cross. If he felt cheated, or if someone simply annoyed him, Richard's response was often fatal. He once said that killing someone was like changing your socks. This cold efficiency caught the attention of local organized crime families, the DeCavalcante crime family of New Jersey, and later the infamous Gambino family in New York began to notice Kuklinski. His size alone made him intimidating. At 6'5" and nearly 300 pounds, he was a giant. But what sealed the deal was his willingness to kill without hesitation and without remorse. At first, the mob used him for debt collection, sending him after people who owed money. Richard didn't just threaten, he acted. Soon he was carrying out hits. He experimented constantly. Guns were common, but Richard also used knives, chains, blunt objects, anything at hand. He once claimed he killed a man with a crossbow just to prove a point. His favorite, however, was cyanide. He liked it because it was quiet, clean, and quick. A drop in someone's drink, a spray from a nasal mister, the victim could be dead in moments, with little sign of foul play. By the early 1970s, Kuklinski had become one of the most feared contract killers on the East Coast. He bragged that he killed for the Gambinos, the DeCavalcantes, and even freelance jobs for whoever who had the cash. His death toll, he claimed, was already in dozens. But what made Richard Kuklinski truly infamous was the method that earned his nickname: freezing his victims. In the world of criminal investigation, the time of death is critical. It helps police establish alibis, track suspects, and reconstruct events. Kuklinski found a way to break this system. After killing a victim, he sometimes stored the body in an industrial freezer for months before dumping it. When police discovered the corpse, the composition didn't match the timeline. Investigators couldn't determine when the victim had been killed, making it almost impossible to connect the murder to Kuklinski. The most famous case of this came in 1983, when a body was found with ice crystals still deep inside the tissue. Medical examiners realized that the victim had been frozen after this. It was a breakthrough clue, but it came after decades of killings. Kuklinski wasn't just killing, he was experimenting. He wanted to prove he could outsmart investigators. He once claimed he had more ways to kill than there are in a cookbook. That kind of arrogance made him even more dangerous. Perhaps the most chilling part of Richard Kuklinski's story is not just the killing, but the mask he wore while doing it. To the outside world, Richard looked like a devoted family man. He married Barbara Pedrici in 1961, and together they had 3 children. He lived in suburban Dumont, New Jersey, in a modest home. Neighbors described him as quiet, polite, even generous. He took his children on vacations, attended school meetings, and bought his wife expensive gifts. But behind closed doors, Barbara later admitted that Richard was controlling, jealous, and sometimes violent. He had a terrifying temper. Still, she never suspected the full truth, that her husband was a professional killer who might leave a mob meeting where he had just executed someone and then sitting down for dinner with his family as if nothing had happened. Richard's ability to compartmentalize his life was extraordinary. He was capable of brutal, cold-blooded violence, and then hours later he could play with his children in the living room. That duality made him one of the most frightening figures in true crime history. By the mid-1980s, Richard Kuklinski's reputation had grown into the legend of the underworld. He was the man who could make enemies disappear without a trace. But while mobsters feared him, law enforcement was closing in. The New Jersey Division of Criminal Justice, alongside the FBI, had been watching him for years. They knew he was responsible for dozens of murders, but knowing wasn't enough. They needed proof, and they knew that catching a man this cautious would take a carefully laid trap. The trap came in the form of an undercover agent named Dominic Polifron. Polifron wasn't just any cop. He was tough, street smart, and capable of earning the trust of dangerous men. His mission? To pose as a potential partner interested in Kuklinski's favorite weapon, cyanide. Over weeks of secret meetings, Polifron and Kuklinski sat across dinner tables, talking business like old friends. Kuklinski was cautious, but his ego often got the better of him. He bragged about how cyanide was his go-to poison. He claimed he could kill a man with just a mist sprayed from a nasal inhaler. Invisible, undetectable, instant death. He even admitted to keeping vials of the deadly liquid on him all the times, like a mechanic carrying his favorite wrench. Polifron played the role perfectly, curious enough to keep Kuklinski talking, careful enough not to raise suspicion. Every word was recorded. Every boast became evidence, and eventually Kuklinski made the mistake that would end his career. He agreed to sell Polifron cyanide for a supposed hit job. That one agreement was all investigators needed to bring down the Iceman. On January 17, 1986, Kuklinski drove to a quiet parking lot in North Bergen, New Jersey, believing he was about to make another profitable deal. But hidden all around him, FBI agents and state troopers lay in wait. They sat in unmarked vans, radios crackling, eyes fixed on their targets. This wasn't just another arrest. This was the takedown of one of the most feared hitmen in America. And nobody knew how Kuklinski would react. When Kuklinski met with Polifron, the exchange began like any other transaction. Calm, casual, and almost friendly. The cyanide was discussed. The deal was in motion. But the second the handoff was made, agents swarmed. Police cars boxed in his vehicle, lights flashing red and blue. Armed officers rushed forward, shouting commands. In the chaos, Kuklinski reached toward his car. Later investigators discovered multiple weapons inside. If he had pulled one of those weapons in those final seconds, the scene might have ended in a bloody shutout. But instead, overwhelmed and surrounded, the Iceman was dragged out of his car, slammed against the hood, and handcuffed. After decades of terror, Richard Kuklinski was finally in custody. The aftermath of his arrest only added to the shock. Inside his car, agents found not only cyanide, but also firearms, a small arsenal at his fingertips. It was a chilling reminder of how dangerous he truly was, and how narrowly law enforcement had avoided tragedy that day. For the first time, Kuklinski's double life began to unravel in public. To his neighbors, he was just a quiet man down the streets, the father who took his kids to school. To his wife, Barbara, he was the provider, the man who kept food on the table. But now, in the harsh light of police sirens, the truth was undeniable. Richard Kuklinski was a contract killer, and his family had been living with a monster. In 1988, Kuklinski was convicted of 5 murders and sentenced to consecutive life sentences. But his story didn't end there. In prison, he became something of a celebrity. He gave a series of chilling interviews where he spoke openly about his crimes. What shocked viewers wasn't just what he said, but how he said it. He described murder in a calm, almost bored tone, as if he were talking about the weather. He admitted to killing men just to see what it felt like. Psychologists studied him, fascinated by his lack of empathy and his ability to separate his two lives. Was he a psychopath, a product of his abusive childhood, or simply a man who enjoyed killing? The debate continues. Richard Kuklinski died in 2006, at the age of 70, in a New Jersey prison. Even in death, the true number of his victims remain uncertain. He admitted to more than 100 murders, but investigators believe the real number is impossible to verify. Richard Kuklinski's story forces us to confront a terrifying truth. Evil can hide in plain sight. He was a man who could commit unspeakable acts of violence and then go home to kiss his children goodnight. The mask of normalcy made him more dangerous than the average killer, and that's why his story continues to haunt the world of true crime. The Iceman once said that killing was just business, but for families of his victims, the pain was anything but business. It was permanent. So the question remains, was Kuklinski a monster created by abuse, or was he born without a conscience? Perhaps we'll never know. What we do know is that Richard Kuklinski left behind a legacy of fear, mystery, and death. Thanks for watching. If you found this story chilling, subscribe for more deep dives into the world's darkest crimes.